All right, in this video, we are given one of the trig functions, sine, in this case, right, is 3/4, and t is in quadrant 2, right? So find the value of the other 5 trigonometric functions for t. Okay, so um, the first thing, right, that I'm going to do right here when they mention this thing about the quadrant, right, is you need to draw what it looks like. Right, so here's my angle, initial side, and then the terminal side is somewhere over here, right? And that point where, and we know the terminal side is over here, right? Because they tell us t is in quadrant 2, right? And so what that means is that the point on the terminal side that is on the unit circle is over here in quadrant 2. In quadrant 2, right, that point is going to have a negative number as the first coordinate, right? Because in the x direction, you're going to the left. So that means that this point is going to be minus, have a negative number, right? And then it's going to have a positive second coordinate because we are going up, right, from the x-axis to get to that point. So whatever these numbers are, the first one's going to be negative, right? The second one's going to be positive. So again, that's going to be very important in just a second, right? As we go to figure out what the cosine is. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, right, is to figure out what the cosine of this angle is, and I'm going to do that by using the fundamental identity, cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Okay? And so in this case, we know the sine, right, is 3/4. So I'm going to replace sine by 3/4, and don't forget this is sine squared, right? So it needs to be 3/4 squared here. So that's equal to 1. All right, and then I'm going to solve this out. And I did some examples of how to do this in previous videos. So right now we have 3/4 squared, right? So that's going to be the same as 3 squared over 4 squared. Oops. So that's going to be 9/16. All right, so I've got each side as simple as I can get it. Now what I want to do is to get cosine squared by itself on one side of the equation, right? And how I would do that is by subtracting 9/16 from both sides. All right, and then 1, right? I need to do 1 minus 9/16. Well, 1 minus 9/16, right? I need a common denominator. So I'm going to have to write 1 as some number over 16, and it's going to be 16, right? 16 divided by 16 is equal to 1, right? So now 16/16 minus 9/16 I can do because there's a common denominator. So I get cosine squared. 16 minus 9 is 7. So I get cosine squared equals 7/16. Okay, so next up, right, I've got cosine squared by itself on one side of the equation. So I can solve that by using the square root property, right? If I have something squared equals a positive number, there's two solutions. That thing is equal to either the plus or the minus of the square root of the number here, okay? And so again, don't forget the plus minus. It's important. A lot of people will gloss over that. So I get cosine of t equals plus or minus 7 over the square root of 16, right? I've got a fraction underneath the radical, and I need to simplify that. the way you simplify that is by, the square root of a fraction is the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom. And then I can simplify the square root of 16. That's just 4. 7, right, is a prime number, so you can't simplify this square roots. Okay. So doing all this calculation, that's going to tell me what the cosine is. And remember, back over here, at the very beginning, the fact that t was in quadrant 2 means that there is a negative, right? That the cosine would have to be negative, right? Because the cosine is the first coordinate on that point on the terminal side. All right, so that gives us our first answer, and that is that the cosine of t is equal to negative square root 7 over 4. All right, so we can figure out what all of the other trigonometric functions are, just similar to how we did. Now that we know that the sine and the cosine, we can figure all of those out the way we did in the previous example when we were doing that for, I think it was pi over 3. All right, so tan will be the next one that I'll do. Remember that one's going to be sine over cosine, right? So sine over cosine, like so. Remember, we defined it originally as y over x, but remember the y would be the sine, right? Cosine would be the x. So you can kind of think about that in a couple of ways. All right, we have to divide these two fractions, so what you want to do is change it to multiplication, right, and take the reciprocal of this number. So 3/4 divided by negative square root 7 over 4 is the same as 3/4 times the reciprocal of negative square root 7 over 4, which is negative 4 over square root 7. And then I can simplify this by canceling out this common factor, right? 4 is a common factor between the numerator and the denominator, so I can cancel that out. And then multiplying across the tops, so I have 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. And on the bottom, 1 times square root 7 is square root 7. Here I have a radical in the bottom, so I need to rationalize that. So multiply top and bottom by square root 7 to get rid of that. On the top, I'd have minus 3 square roots of 7. All right, just multiplying across the tops. Here, multiplying across the bottoms, I have square root 7 times square root 7. That's just going to come out to be 7, right, when I do that. Because square root 7 times square root 7 would be square root of 7 times 7, which is 49, and the square root of 49 is 7. Okay, so that's the answer for tangent. Next up, I will do secant. Secant's going to be 1 over the cosine, so 1 over minus square root 7 over 4. And so dividing 1 by this fraction is the same as multiplying 1 by its reciprocal, right? And so when I do that, I get minus 4 over the square root of 7. And again, I have a radical in the bottom part, so I need to rationalize it the way that we've been doing before. And since it's only square root 7, just multiply top and bottom by square root 7. On the top, I get minus 4 square roots of 7. On the bottom, square root 7 times square root 7, just like I mentioned up here, will just wind up to be 7. So that's the secant. All right, next up, let's do the cosecant. And cosecant is going to be 1 over the sine. Sine was 3/4. So 1 divided by 3/4 is the same as 1 times 4/3, right? And that's just going to come out to be 4/3. All right, and let's see, what are we missing here? The cotangent. All right, cotangent is going to be cosine over sine. Or x over y if you're thinking about it in that way. So the cosine was minus 7 over root 4. The sine was 3/4. So that's going to be negative square root of 7 divided by 4 divided by 3/4. And dividing, right, by 3/4 is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal, which is 4/3. I do have common factor of 4 between the top and the bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. 4 goes into itself once. It goes into 4 once down here. And then multiplying across the tops, I get negative square root of 7. Across the bottom, I get 3. Okay. All right, and that is it on this problem.